In the summer of 2010, 17-year-old Sarah Johnson from Gresham, Oregon, went for a hike in the Mount Hood National Forest. She knew the route well and loved spending time alone there. But Sarah never returned home. 6 years have passed. In the basement of the school where she once studied, during the cleaning, they came across a dusty box. Inside was Sarah's notebook, but the pages contained not only the girl's notes. There were also drawings there, strange, disturbing, and all too recognizable to those who saw them. Sarah Johnson lived in the town of Gresham, Oregon. She was 17 years old. She lived with her mother and younger brother in a small house on a quiet street. Her neighbors knew her as a calm, responsible girl who did not like noisy companies. Sarah preferred to take lonely walks in the woods where she could think and write down her impressions. Mount Hood National Forest became a special place for her. The forest stretched for hundreds of kilometers, with steep slopes, mountain streams, and dark spruce forests. It was crowded on weekends, but on weekdays, when most people were working, the trails were empty. That was exactly what Sarah appreciated. The silence, interrupted only by the sound of the wind or the distant singing of birds. In July of 2010, she left home in the morning. The day was warm, slightly cloudy, and the weather seemed stable. She was carrying a backpack with a few things in it: water, a light jacket, and a snack. Her mother saw her daughter zipping up her backpack before she left. This image is etched in her memory forever. A neighbor confirmed that she saw the girl at the bus stop around 9 in the morning. Sarah always took the bus that went along the highway towards Mount Hood. It was her usual route. The bus driver later confirmed that the girl was on the bus that day. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the trees behind the glass for most of the trip. A camera near a small roadside shop captured her getting off the bus. She went inside, bought a chocolate bar and a bottle of soda. The footage shows Sarah pays, thanks the cashier, puts her purchases in a bag, and goes outside. Then she walks along the roadside and disappears around a bend leading to the forest. This is the last confirmed evidence that she made it to the trail. The family was not worried. They were used to such hikes. Sarah liked to spend several hours there and then return home in the evening. But this time, it was different. By 6 in the evening, her mother began to worry. Usually at this time, her daughter was already home, helping with dinner or sitting at her drawings. The phone was silent. At first, the mother thought the battery was dead. Hour after hour passed. Dusk was falling fast, the room was dark, but Sarah still did not appear. Around 9 in the evening, the mother started calling her daughter's friends. No one had seen her. A friend from class said, "She was supposed to be in the forest. We didn't even agree to meet today." This only increased the anxiety. At 10 o'clock in the evening, her mother went out into the yard, peering into the darkness and listening to every car that passed by. She clutched her phone, dialing familiar numbers. The answers did not bring any relief. By 11 in the evening, it became clear that something was wrong. Sarah was not inclined to run away from home or leave her family in the dark. Her mother dialed the police. The officer on duty would later write in his report, "A woman reported that her 17-year-old daughter had gone for a hike in Mount Hood and had not returned." The officer asked the standard questions: what she was wearing, what she had brought with her, who she was supposed to meet. The mother's answers sounded calm, but her voice was trembling. She clearly knew that her daughter had a backpack with her. It was the only thing that could explain her plans. After the conversation, the silence in the house became unbearable. The mother walked from window to window, waiting for the sound of familiar footsteps, hoping to see her daughter open the door and say she was just delayed. But this did not happen. Hour after hour dragged on endlessly. An ordinary summer day in Gresham turned into a night of endless waiting. The morning was supposed to bring the first police action and the start of the official search. The morning after Sarah Johnson's disappearance, Gresham already knew about the incident. The police officially registered a missing persons case and began standard procedures. The town quickly organized a search headquarters. A tent was set up in the parking lot at the main entrance to the Mount Hood National Forest, where police, volunteers, and journalists gathered. The first hours were crucial. It was believed that the girl could have simply gotten lost. The forest area is huge, tens of kilometers of trails, canyons, streams, and gorges. The rescuers knew that if she was still alive, the chance to find her was greatest now. Dozens of people were working in the area. Police officers formed groups and sent them on different routes. Volunteers from the local community also joined the operation. Many knew Sarah personally. Friends from her class brought photos and helped distribute leaflets with her face on them. The atmosphere resembled an emergency situation. Search dogs, maps, walkie-talkies, tense faces. The search was complicated by the weather. The night rain made the ground slippery. Fog descended in the mountains, and helicopters could not stay above the trees for long. Everyone was hoping for an accidental find, a piece of cloth, a footprint on the ground, any small thing. On the second day of the search, a group of volunteers came across a small stream a few kilometers from the highway. A jacket was hanging on the branches of a bush. It was wet, but intact, with no signs of a struggle. Nearby, in the grass, was a silver earring. The mother immediately recognized her daughter's jewelry. This was the first confirmation. Sarah had indeed gone deeper into the forest. But then, the trail stopped. No backpack, no other belongings. For the police, it looked like a strange coincidence. For the mother, it was a key signal. She repeated that her daughter always carried a backpack with her. Inside, among other things, there was a notebook in which Sarah wrote down her thoughts and made drawings. She never left the house without it, the mother told investigators. The absence of the backpack and notebook was the first big mystery. Logic dictated that if the girl was in trouble, the things should have remained nearby. But they disappeared completely. This led the police to several versions. The first was that Sarah herself had taken them, possibly changing her route. The second is that someone else was nearby and deliberately hid some of her belongings. Search teams combed the area day after day. They used dogs that could pick up the trail even after the rain. But the result was zero. The dogs picked up the scent near the found jacket and lost it a few meters away. The forest seemed to absorb all traces. At the headquarters, we had maps with marked areas where we had already searched. New squares were added every day. Hundreds of people walked for kilometers, but to no avail. On the fifth day, the scale of the operation was increased. Special search and rescue teams from other districts joined the case. Journalists called the case the Mount Hood Mystery. Newspapers published articles with photos of Sarah. Some headlines read about a lost girl, while others hinted at a possible crime. For her mother, each article was a new blow. She refused to give interviews, but repeated the same thought to the cameras. My daughter would not have left home just like that. She would always come back. A week later, the active search began to be scaled back. The police recognized that the area was too large and there was little evidence. A jacket and an earring were the only items found. The rest of the items, including the backpack, disappeared without a trace. It was a painful moment for the community. Everyone was waiting for a breakthrough, but it did not happen. The case was officially transferred to the status of missing. The press switched to other news. The forest regained its usual silence. The morning at the search headquarters began with a count of new finds. On the table next to the map were several small bags of evidence. Each contained something that could have belonged to Sarah Johnson. The report looked restrained. A piece of fabric similar in color to the missing person's clothes was found. A chocolate bar wrapper was found. Shoe prints of an indeterminate size were recorded. But for the mother, these were real shards of hope. The police followed a standard protocol. In the first days, they moved in concentric circles from the place where the jacket was found. They found several clear footprints on the damp soil, sneaker tracks that matched the description of Sarah's shoes. They stretched along the stream and broke off at a rocky area. Nothing further could be recorded. Another group came across a plastic soda bottle. According to the cashier at the roadside shop, this was the drink the girl had bought before the hike. The bottle was lying in the thickets and looked like it had been thrown away in a hurry. Investigators sent the find for examination, but there were no fingerprints left because of the moisture. The most surprising was a candy bar wrapper found several hundred meters from the bottle. It was crumpled but well preserved. The match with the store receipt was obvious. This confirmed that Sarah had reached this part of the trail. Despite these findings, the investigation was stalled. So the police began to formulate official versions. The first version was a voluntary escape. Reports indicated that teenagers often leave home without warning. Some run away to friends or try to start a new life. Investigators checked the girl's social media, email, and phone contacts. They found nothing suspicious. She did not take any money with her. For her mother, this theory sounded absurd. She loved her home, helped with her brother, dreamed of going to college. She had no plans to run away. The second version was an accident. Mount Hood was known for its danger. A few steps to the side and you could fall into a crevasse or twist your ankle on slippery rocks. The police believed that Sarah could have slipped, fainted, and not had time to call for help. The findings confirmed that she had been walking in her usual direction, but then her footprints broke off. For the investigators, this supported the hypothesis of an accident. For her mother, it was different. The things looked like someone had left them there on purpose, not lost them in the chaos of the fall. The third version was an attack. The police were reluctant to consider this theory, but they could not ignore it. The trail ran close to a highway, which was used by dozens of cars every day. Sometimes, there were cases of attacks on tourists. Investigators checked the criminal records of recent years and interviewed visitors to the forest that day. There were no direct witnesses. But for the mother, this version seemed closest to the truth. Someone had to be there. Otherwise, how else to explain that she disappeared so suddenly? The investigation lasted for weeks. The newspapers published the girl's photo with the headlines, "Missing" and "The Mystery of Mount Hood." Some believed it was a story about an escape. Others wrote about a possible victim of a chance encounter. Meanwhile, small finds continued to appear in the forest. One of the volunteers reported coming across a campfire, but experts determined that it was old and had nothing to do with the disappearance. Another found a piece of fabric that could not be matched to Sarah's clothes. All this created confusion. It was as if the forest was throwing up crumbs but refused to show the main thing. It was obvious to the family that none of the versions fit their feelings. They did not believe in escape and could not accept the idea of accidental death. The only possibility left in their minds was that someone had met Sarah on the trail and made her disappear. At the end of August, the official search was called off. The report read, "No active results. Operation suspended." For the mother, it sounded like a sentence, but she persisted. My daughter was not lost in the forest. It was something else. Thus, the case gradually moved from being a hot case to an unsolved one. And the evidence collected. A few small things that confirmed Sarah's path became the only fragments of her last day around which the police built contradictory versions. 6 years have passed since Sarah Johnson last set out for Mount Hood National Forest. The case that once captured the attention of the entire community has become a cold, archival volume on the shelves of the county station. A thick folder with yellowed notes, search area maps, and dozens of testimonies lay among hundreds of similar files, but was never closed completely. Time became a kind of trap for the family. Every July, they returned to the same place near the trail where the search headquarters first set up. They would leave flowers, light candles, and say prayers there. Sarah's younger brother grew older over the years, but every time he stood next to his mother, holding her hand, it was a ritual that was both empowering and heartbreaking. The community looked at this story differently. At first, dozens of people participated in volunteer searches, wore T-shirts with the words, "Bring Sarah home," and printed leaflets. But, over time, the enthusiasm waned. New events replaced the old ones. The name Johnson was mentioned less and less in coffee shops and stores. For most Gresham residents, it was just another mystery that no one hoped to find answers to. The police did not officially close the case, but there were no new leads. Each new officer who took over the case came to the same conclusion. The findings were too fragmentary to form a picture. A jacket, an earring, a candy bar wrapper, and a soda bottle. That's all. Not a single line that could lead to a clue. Several times, there were fresh messages. People would call and say that they had seen a girl who looked like Sarah in another city. The police checked these reports, but none of them were confirmed. They were either coincidences or fabrications. Meanwhile, Sarah's mother did not give up her own version. She was convinced that her daughter had been taken by people. Every time journalists returned to this topic, the woman repeated, "My girl was not lost in the forest. Someone made her disappear." She refused to use the word dead. For her, Sarah was and would remain alive, at least until there was indisputable evidence. The psychologists who worked with the family spoke of protracted grief, a condition where a person cannot go through all the stages of loss because there is no body and no clear answer. This made the mother return in her mind every day to the morning when her daughter left the house with her backpack. In the memories, everything looked ordinary, but in reality, this moment became the point from which time went differently. The community perceived the story with a certain fatalism. For many, Mount Hood became a symbol of mystery, a place where you could disappear without a trace. Tourists still came here, but the phrase was heard more and more often among the locals. Don't go alone to the place where that girl disappeared. Once a year, the newspapers made a small note of the anniversary. Usually it was a short text with the words, "The case of Sarah Johnson is still unsolved." The photo of a smiling girl next to it looked eerie because people realized that behind that smile was an unsolved disappearance. The police officers who worked on the case admitted that it remained an unsolved mystery for them. One of the officers said, "The worst thing is when you have the pieces of the puzzle, but most of the pieces have been thrown away, and you know that you can't put the whole picture together." Years passed, but my mother still came to the forest. She would stand by the stream where the jacket was found and look at the water for a long time. For her, it was the place where her daughter had been for the last time. She would talk to her in her mind, hoping that Sarah could hear. Officially, the case remained in the status of missing. There was not enough evidence to name anyone as a suspect. There was also no body to record the death. Only a silent forest, a few findings, and 6 years of waiting. For most of the community, it was a lost cause. But for the family, it remained an unfinished story. And no one knew that this very cold archive would one day be reopened because of a discovery that would turn the whole investigation around. For 6 years, no new evidence had come to light in the Sarah Johnson case. The story looked like it was frozen in time. But in the summer of 2016, everything changed. In the old Gresham school where Sarah had studied, the basement was being renovated. The room had been used as a warehouse for years. There were decommissioned desks, boxes of notebooks, and sports equipment that had long since lost its appearance. When the workers began to clear the rubble, one of them came across a small cardboard box standing in the corner. It was covered with dust and cobwebs, but the top was covered with a notebook cover. It was clearly labeled Sarah Johnson. The workers didn't even bother to turn the pages. They immediately realized how important this find could be. The box was handed over to the school principal, and a few hours later, it was in the hands of the family. For the woman, this moment was a blow. For the first time in 6 years, she was holding something that belonged to her daughter. The first pages contained the usual entries: dates, short notes about everyday life, sketches of trees and paths. It was the same handwriting she remembered. But the further her mother flipped through the pages, the stranger they became. In the middle, there were entries about a person whom Sarah called by name her teacher. At first, the text looked ordinary, a few lines where she wrote that he was kind, that he understood her, that he was easy to talk to. But then new, more warning phrases appeared. The notebook contained references to meetings after school, to things that Mom doesn't need to know. Between the lines, there were drawings. At first, schematic portraits of the teacher, recognizable by his glasses and characteristic profile. Over time, these drawings became caricatured, distorted facial features, gloomy silhouettes, captions like, "Scarier than he looks," or, "He's blackmailing me." The last pages were the creepiest. Among the crooked lines and fragments of text appeared words that indicated pressure. It read, "He said no one would believe me," and then, "It's scarier when he smiles." For the mother, these lines confirmed that her daughter was indeed hiding something important. But it was also a painful testimony. Sarah was afraid, but she could not tell anyone. The police officially recorded the discovery. But the contents of the notebook were not made public in full. Sarah's mother told the investigators directly that some of the entries were too personal and should not be published in newspapers or on television. She asked, "Check this teacher first. Only then make any statements." The police agreed. It was decided that there would be no publicity until they had checked the key details and found out if the recordings really pointed to the person Sarah mentioned. In the city, the discovery quickly turned into a rumor. People argued, how did the notebook end up in the basement? Why had it been there for so many years? And most importantly, who put it there? For the family, this discovery was a turning point. The mother said only one thing: there are answers in this notebook, but not everything should be seen by other people's eyes. The decision to search the teacher's house was made after several weeks of discussion. The discovery of the notebook and the lines mentioned in it became the basis for obtaining a warrant. The police had prepared carefully. The documents stated that they needed to seize any items that might have belonged to Sarah Johnson, as well as items related to her disappearance. It was a cool morning. The convoy of police cars stopped on a quiet street in Gresham, where a small art teacher's house stood. Its facade looked abandoned, peeling paint, an old veranda, weeds in the yard. The neighbors were peeking out from behind the curtains because they realized from the first minutes that something serious was happening. The officers went inside. The owner was at home. He opened the door, but immediately demanded an explanation, saying that it was all a misunderstanding. When the Friday say when did read him the warrant, he stood silently for a long time, clenching his fists. Then he angrily stepped aside and let the group of investigators in. The house looked strange, but not criminal. There were drawings and paintings everywhere in the living room. Some of them were ordinary, like schoolwork. Others were disturbing. Dark colors, blurred silhouettes, gloomy faces. However, all this could be explained as creative style. In the kitchen, they found only empty cans, old dishes, and piles of newspapers. In the bedroom, there were scattered clothes, books, and several boxes of papers. Nothing that would directly indicate involvement in the girl's disappearance. The search lasted for hours. The police worked methodically. They checked the closets, the attic, the pantry. Everything was photographed and described. But the result remained the same. Suspicious, but not enough. The atmosphere inside the house was heavy. The smell of dampness, stale air, and paint. It seemed that time had frozen here. When the officers got to the door leading to the basement, the teacher abruptly stood in the way. He began to say that there was only old furniture and garbage, that it was dangerous because the stairs were broken. His voice was shaking, but he tried to sound confident. The police insisted that the warrant covered all the premises. The longer the dialogue went on, the more he lost control. Finally, the man almost shouted, "There is nothing there!" The words had the opposite effect. The team leader ordered the doors to be opened. When they were opened, the smell of dampness hit the air. The staircase was indeed old, but it could withstand the weight of the officers. They went down, lighting the space with flashlights. The basement was small, with a low ceiling. There were broken chairs, boxes of books and papers along the walls. The police opened them one by one. At first, there was only dust and junk. But in the corner, covered with an old cloth, was a metal chest. When they opened it, they found several things inside that stopped everyone. There was a silver earring identical to the one found by the stream. A hair clip that Sarah's mother recognized from old photos of her daughter. A few sheets of her schoolwork, an English notebook with her name still on the cover. And at the bottom was a photo, a group picture of the students, cut out so that only Sarah's face remained. These items became a turning point. The officers immediately recorded the discovery, and everything was packed as evidence. One of the investigators said quietly, "Now we know she was here." The teacher was sitting in the living room between the two officers. When they told him what they had found, he turned pale and refused to speak. His silence sounded louder than any words. The news of the search spread instantly in the town. For neighbors who had known him for years as an ordinary teacher, it came as a shock. But the police already had material evidence. And although they had not yet given a complete answer to the question of what happened to Sarah, there was now a thread that led to a specific person. The house was officially declared a crime scene. The basement was sealed, and all the findings were sent for examination. For the investigators, it was a breakthrough after years of silence. For the family, it was a painful confirmation that their daughter had indeed fallen into the hands of someone they had never suspected. After the search of the teacher's house, the police had the most important thing in recent years: items that directly pointed to Sarah Johnson. The chest from the basement was carefully packed and sent to a forensic laboratory. Now, the task of the experts was to prove that these things really belonged to the missing girl. The procedure lasted for weeks. Each item was checked separately. The silver earring found near the stream during the first search has now been matched. The research confirmed that both pieces of jewelry were made of the same alloy and had the same pattern. For the mother, there was no doubt. These were the earrings she had given her daughter for her 16th birthday. The hair clip also matched the one Sarah wore every day. On its surface, the experts found traces of hair that had been preserved over the years. Genetic analysis confirmed it. The DNA belonged to Sarah Johnson. This was the first indisputable proof. Special attention was paid to the English notebook. Inside were several pages filled with a familiar handwriting. The school teachers confirmed that these were the assignments Sarah had done in high school. A handwriting examination confirmed their testimony. But the most chilling discovery was the photo. A group photo with only the girl's face left on it. The rest had been cut out with scissors. Experts found that the photo was taken at school a year before she disappeared. For the investigators, this was proof of the teacher's special attention to the student, which went far beyond the professional. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed. Some recalled that he rarely left the house in recent years, avoiding conversations, but sometimes loud furniture movement or metal scraping could be heard from the basement. Others confirmed that they had seen him bring boxes with unknown contents into the house. All of this formed a picture of a closed but disturbing lifestyle. When the forensic evidence confirmed that the items belonged to Sarah, the police officially opened the case as a murder investigation. This required a number of approvals, but the available evidence already allowed them to act. The prosecutor signed an arrest warrant. The arrest took place quietly, without publicity. The police arrived at his house in the morning. He did not resist, only remained silent for a long time when they read him his rights. According to the officer, the teacher's face was pale, but his eyes remained cold and emotionless. The news spread quickly in the town. People who had only guessed about his strangeness for years now had confirmation. He was the main suspect in a case that had remained unsolved for more than half a decade. For the family, the moment of his arrest was twofold. On the one hand, it was a confirmation that their suspicions were justified. On the other hand, it was a painful realization that their daughter's found belongings had been in someone else's basement for all these years. The mother said only one thing: "Now I know she was really afraid for a reason." The media spread short messages. A suspect has been arrested in the Sarah Johnson case. He is a former art teacher from Gresham. No details were disclosed. The police officially stated, "The evidence collected allows us to link him to the personal belongings of the missing person." For the investigators, the chain of evidence now looked logical. Sarah's notebook with disturbing notes, the findings in the basement of his house, and the confirmation of experts. Together, it formed a coherent picture that led from her last words in the notebook to a specific address in Gresham. It was a breakthrough that had been waiting for 6 years. But at the same time, the main question remained, where is the girl's body? The teacher did not give any answer. His silence remained the most eerie element in the story. The trial of Harold Myers, a former art teacher from Gresham, began in the fall of 2017. It was one of the most high-profile cases in the county over the past decade. Journalists, neighbors, and even former students came to the courthouse every day. Everyone wanted to hear the answer to the main question: what happened to 17-year-old Sarah Johnson? But no answer was ever given. The atmosphere in the room was one of pressure and anticipation. The prosecutors presented a chain of evidence: the girl's notebook with disturbing notes found in the school basement, items taken from the basement of the Myers house, including an earring, a hair clip, and a school notebook, and forensic evidence that confirmed these items belonged to Sarah. They also showed a group photo of her with only her face in it. Investigators testified under oath how the search took place, how the suspect tried to dissuade them from entering the basement, how his behavior changed every minute. For the jury, it looked like an obvious picture. He was hiding something and had been keeping his students' belongings for years. The defense tried to build a different line. The lawyers claimed that the things found could have gotten into the house by accident or been planted. They insisted that there was no body, no definitive proof of the murder. However, this strategy did not work as expected. The most eerie moments were when Harold Myers himself was given the floor. He stood straight, kept calm, and answered briefly. He was asked dozens of times about the day of his disappearance, about possible contacts with Sarah, about things in his basement. He stubbornly repeated, "I had nothing to do with it." When asked where he got the earring or the photo, he remained silent or said, "I don't know." Witnesses described him as a man who always kept himself aloof. Former students recalled that he was strict, but not openly aggressive. For many, this was the most frightening thing. A quiet man who taught art could have been carrying a secret for years. Sarah's family sat in the front row. Her mother was holding a copy of the notebook that marked the beginning of a new stage in the case. She listened to every word and almost never took her eyes off the defendant. For her, this trial was not only about justice, but also about the hope of learning at least something about the last moments of her daughter's life. But Harold Myers remained steadfast. In his final speech, the prosecutor said, "We have every reason to believe that he is responsible for the disappearance and death of Sarah Johnson. He kept her things, avoided explanations, hid the basement. He is the only person that every piece of evidence points to." The jury reached a verdict of guilty of kidnapping and murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But even this verdict did not answer the main question. Sarah's body was never found. During interrogations, Myers was asked again and again, "Where is she? What have you done with her?" He looked straight ahead and remained silent. His silence was more terrifying than any words. For the mother, the court's decision was a partial relief, but also a new burden. She received legal confirmation of her guilt, but could not bury her daughter. The certificate officially stated, "Sarah Johnson is presumed dead." But her final resting place remained unknown. The town of Gresham lived in a double reality. On the one hand, the case, which had been dragging on for years, finally had a verdict. On the other hand, the Mount Hood forest remained a place where people were reluctant to go alone. Its silence continued to remind us that a 17-year-old girl had disappeared there, and that even after the arrest of the culprit, the truth had not been fully revealed. Journalists wrote, "The case is closed, but questions remain." Local residents said among themselves, "He will never say what he did." A sense of indescribable anxiety took hold in the community, like a shadow hovering over the town and the forest. For the family, the story never ended. They had a sentence, but no grave to bring flowers to. And every year in July, the mother and brother returned to the same creek in Mount Hood, where they had once found only a jacket and an earring. They stood there in silence, as if waiting for the forest to finally give up its secret. That was the end of a case that had lasted more than 6 years. The teacher, who was called ordinary and even invisible, received a life sentence. But Harold Myers' silence and the lack of an answer to the question, "Where is the body?" left the case open in the minds of everyone who knew him.